timely reminders, I suppose, to be honest. I think silage is cut. We're beginning to come to the end of the breeding season, which I'm going to talk about as well. But we also need to, I suppose, maybe start assessing what's gone on during the course of the year, and maybe plan for the rest of the year and plan for future years around what we need to do. So I won't be long today, it's 10-15 minutes probably at most. Some of you may or may not find this relevant. I think it's probably relevant to all, but it's just, as I said, a timely reminder maybe to for people to start thinking about what's gone on so far this year and what they need to do for the rest of the year maybe. So I suppose just first, I suppose we're just beginning to make our way into the latter half of the breeding season. Depending on the date that you started, you're going to have a varying finishing time. And as you will well know, we'll be advocating that people would have a tight breeding season in order to have a tight calving season, and that we can get this kind of systematic approach to farming in a grass-based system, so that we calve on time, breed on time, can dry off in en masse basically if you want to, and then obviously we're ready for the following calving season again. So depending on the start date, depending on where you are in the country, that time is coming at you fairly sharpishly, or else it's a bit further away. Maybe you're not as far into the breeding season as others are. So obviously you can see there we range from probably the 15th to the 20th of April, in some cases even the 1st of April, breeding start dates, which means that those people will be finishing very, very shortly. For those of you that started around the 20th of April, you're looking at the 13th of July being your finish date on a 12-week breeding season. The more common, I suppose, is the 25th, 27th of April start date. So that's the 18th of July or the 20th of July to finish up. With the May, the people who start in May and in or around May 7th, May 1st, ranging from the 24th of July through to the 30th of July. Now, we spoke about this, I suppose, on a number of occasions, and George would have spoken about it last year as well, in relation to pulling the bull early. Obviously, if you've been in a scenario where you've been calving off of a 15-week breeding season, then there are cows in the herd that aren't going to be probably falling into line to finish up on a 12-week breeding season. So if you are making the decision to cut back, you have to be conscious that there's possibly a cost associated with that in terms of loss of animals if you're going to go for the big bang and take them out after 3, or just stop breeding after 12 weeks in one go. Or the alternative is that you creep back bit by bit, and we've talked about it there a couple of weeks ago as well. So I suppose this is just to highlight that today is the 17th of June, and obviously there's only kind of 4 weeks left for those early starters. We'll say there's April herds. So the most important thing then is to make sure that we have everything that we want to keep on the farm bred. So if as I said, you're coming off of a 15-week breeding season, your cows may just about be kind of coming right to actually be bred if they're all calved at this stage. So we need to follow up on those and make sure that they do get bred. And without a doubt, there's a level of fatigue comes into farming at this stage of the year, because we've been going full tilt basically since maybe late January, early February with calving. Again, it's been, I suppose, a difficult season or difficult year in one sense, in that we've been under pressure for grass for quite a period, and then when things turned around, we were under pressure to manage the grass. So it's been a little bit unrelenting, and maybe in one sense. So people are tired, and the mind can come off the game a small little bit. So we just need to refocus for one last shot at the breeding situation. So just to refer you back to what Dan O'Riordan spoke to us about from ICBF a couple of weeks ago in terms of running the weekly fertility report, identifying any cows that haven't yet been bred, and putting a plan in place with your vet in order to make sure that they get a straw put into them or get served. Leaving it to chance may work, but it may not as well. So I think probably being proactive about it, if you want to keep these animals in the herd, you should be moving on these fairly quickly now. So run the weekly fertility report as Dan showed us a couple of weeks ago. Try and get those cows bred as quickly as possible. The earlier the better, obviously. If you're in the April 20th scenario and you have 4 weeks left, if you can get them bred in the next week or so, there's a possibility that they can get two, if they repeat, that they'll get 2 serves. Obviously, as we go on a little bit more, there's greater opportunity there, so the extra weeks will count for people. But just to keep the foot on the pedal in terms of breeding, follow through to make sure that all the cows are bred that you want to keep, and maximize the chances of retaining those, because obviously they're not, by the nature of the bovine reproductive cycle, there's going to be a proportion of them repeat anyway. So we need to get them bred sooner rather than later to give them the chance of getting a second serve if necessary. Okay, so that's the breeding piece, I suppose. As I said, it's just to try and keep the foot on the pedal for now. The next piece I'm going to talk about is kind of regulatory stuff again that we have to keep on top of, or that we have to be mindful of. So silage pits, I suppose, there's two elements to this. There's the management of the pit itself. I suppose you just need to check effluent flows from silage pits now, depending on when you've it done. There's an awful lot of, I was in West Cork yesterday, a lot of silage cut over the previous weekend actually, because I had been down there last week as well, and they were very much behind, as Michal O'Leary may have alluded to last week. Things were rather tricky in West Cork in terms of weather with the last number of weeks. So a lot of silage gone in now in the last week or two, and then I suppose over the country, all silage has literally been done since the 1st of June, really nearly. So just check effluent flows from pits, make sure that they're diverted, obviously, just in case somebody hasn't been diverted, and take action if something has to be done in terms of effluent getting away from a pit. Make sure reception tanks have adequate capacity would be a very important thing as well. We've seen situations in the past where the effluent was diverted, but the tank was actually full already with slurry, so the capacity of the tank was obviously limited in terms of what it could take for effluent, and it backed up the pipe and actually overflowed from the diversion point into a stream, so causing a problem in one case. Then I suppose just from a management point of view, it's important. I suppose the beauty of bales is that once they're wrapped generally, and as long as they're not damaged, you have a good effective seal. Silage pits have to be managed in that obviously they sink after a couple of days, or even within a day or two of being filled, and you need to tighten the cover. And quite often we can go in, I see it myself, that you drive into a yard and you see cover kind of flapping or quite loose areas, as one of the clients described it before. So you need to make sure that that's tightened up to make sure that there's an effective seal to get the ensiling process to occur. Then I suppose definitely what I've heard a lot of in the last couple of weeks is that the first cuts have been massive, very big yields from them. Quality wise, I suppose we'll have to wait and see what way they're going to work out. But they did fill out very quickly in a very short space of time, and all contractors have found that they have had bigger first cuts than would have been expected given the way the weather had been. So planning for that second cut, I know in one case, large herd that has obviously multiple pits, they've gone into second cut pit with their first cut in terms of capacity, that they ran out of space and what they would have expected to put their first cut into. So does that mean that you're going to be under pressure if you're putting in a second cut into that area as well? And maybe you need to make a plan for that. Possibly may have to bale some second cut in order to allow for safe storage of silage. Okay, so just be conscious of that. So there is a fodder budgeting tool on PBI that I think we've shown to you in the past. So it's probably worth a look at there, just to plan winter feed requirements and see what you have in stock following your first cut. And then planning of second cut areas. Maybe there might be opportunities to reseed if you have a lot of silage in stock, if you're fortunate enough to have silage left over from the previous winter, and you now have a very big first cut gone in as well. There may be opportunities to take out some ground and not necessarily put it in for a second cut, but be very sure that you have a good reserve built into your fodder budget in that scenario. It's important that we always carry a reserve if we can at all, to allow for situations like we probably experienced in the spring of this year where we were slightly tight. One thing being to our advantage was that we were still able to get out and graze because conditions were good, but it was just cold and there was poor growth. But if we were in a scenario where that was a wet spring along with poor growth, we would have had to feed a lot more silage. And in some cases, some people are actually out of silage, obviously, after the spring that we had. So they will have to replenish stocks. So be very sure that you have a good buffer, kind of a good reserve in there in terms of if you do hit a bump in the road, or if you ended up getting locked up or anything and had extra stock on hand, that you would have adequate silage available to you. So don't cut it too tight, but I'm also saying that there may be opportunities to reseed some of the silage ground early, obviously, which is to its benefit. to get it established well before the end of the year. But also maybe that you might be able to free up ground on a milking platform if you take silage off a milking platform to reseed that instead of taking second cut from it, or maybe take a lighter first cut from it that you could take quality silage from. The other question then, I suppose, it's cropping up a lot in the last couple of weeks, given the size of the first cut crops that have been there, is will there be extra feed storage space needed for the future? So there's a health and safety concern being raised quite significantly around the heights of pits that contractors are being asked to put in. So as I think we've discussed it before, maybe as well, about the increase in the numbers on of stock on farms, but in general there probably hasn't been an increase in the feed storage capacity on the farm to match that. And look, I suppose that's understandable. Obviously people try to put the stock there, obviously, to pay for facilities in due course and try to manage with what they have as best as they can. But at the same time, we can't overlook health and safety issues around people working on the farm, obviously. And if we're asking contractors to go to a dangerous height with silage pits, then we need to start looking at options around increasing that feed capacity, or else you're going to have to look at baling a proportion of your crop to reduce the height of that pit for those contractors. So I think, look, long term, obviously, the more storage capacity that people have and the more storage space people have, it's going to be a better thing. So planning that, just assessing it now, obviously not suggesting that you're going to have to you're doing it straight away, but you need to look at the situation and ask yourself the question, do you need to be looking at putting down another silage slab or extending the slab that you have, or something along those lines, just in order to improve the health and safety of the farmyard. And look, it's no different from your own point of view. If the contractor is concerned about going to the height that he's going to, if you're ultimately removing tires or removing plastic from that pit and it's a very high pit, you're obviously in danger yourself, and we want to try and eliminate those risks as much as possible. So plenty of space obviously will make it a lot easier for everybody concerned. So then I suppose this is something that everybody that's a Teagasc client will have gotten in the newsletter that was sent out for June, and it relates to derogation, I suppose, in particular. But I would say that people should be thinking along the lines of, if you're not in derogation, that many of these rules and regulations are only a matter of years, a very few short years even for that matter, away from being applied to all farms probably, or definitely farms that are farming at any level of intensity, and not even derogation intensity. So just, I suppose this is supposed to come into play. It did come into force from the 1st of January of this year, and we've had plenty of warning about it, I suppose, in that it was flagged 2 years ago that it was going to come into play on the 1st of January 2021. But we were it was quite slow in terms of getting the information as to what was actually going to be required in terms of how it was going to be implemented, etc. So just to run down through these again, excluding animals from water courses. So you can see here in this scenario that the cows are actually going into the water with the gate set up here in order to allow them access to the stream for drinking. And obviously you can see here just behind, if you can see the mouse moving there, and that there's obviously the traffic going in and out of the river is creating a muddy area there, or a soiled area there basically, which means that in heavy rain that there's going to be runoff and sediment is going to be moved into that water. Also the cows and the stock moving in and out of the water are going to bring sediment into that water as well as likely dunging in the water as well. So there's an E. coli / water quality issue from that point of view. The other issue that comes about from that scenario then is that phosphorus binds to soil particles, and when they get brought into the water course there, it's actually bringing phosphorus into the water as well. So you can see the objective here will be to remove the stock from the river completely and fence the boundary out then at 1.5 meters from the top of the bank as well. And the same applies then to the water troughs, as you know, no matter what way. And I think these plastic troughs are particularly bad for it, but they can tend to form a little island because stock are coming in, they're lapping water that's spilling out around it. You don't generally tend to have hardcore areas around these that are able to take the traffic then coming to them, and they can have quite a lot of muck and mud around them, and they're there right beside the water course. So obviously the risk is that the sediment goes into the water course here again, and as I said already, that the pee attached to that sediment then is now in the water course as a result of it. So some people have this done already, but it's just, as I said, a timely reminder that 6 months is gone since, or maybe slightly less is gone since you were talking, if you're in derogation, since you're talking to your advisor in relation to this. And it's just to remind you that this is a requirement of your derogation. So you need to be going about this now as things are calming down slightly from the very busy first period of the year that's associated with dairy farming in general. So you can see the objective would be to move them 20 metres from water courses. I suppose Tom Ryan and Francis Quigley and those have always advocated that we would move water troughs to the middle of the fields to give greater options or greater access to them during the course of the grazing season. Those throw its own complications in, I suppose, in mixing or when grazing breaks in the springtime, but the idea would be that they should be in the centre of the paddock generally. So you need to move them away from the water course anyway, and a very minimum 20 metres from them. Now, this was a big concern. The third one here was a big concern for people where cows are crossing rivers on a regular basis or water courses on a regular basis. And if they're fenced on both sides and the cows are only crossing, then it's actually okay. Obviously, this is much preferred option to bridge it from the point of view that you obviously remove the cows from the river. Again, the same thing applies here. Look, with the best will in the world, there's going to be sediment on the cows' feet as they're going through this. The other thing is obviously that cows are going to dung, especially when they do step into water, they tend to lift the tail. So a bridge scenario, I think if you're using it on a very regular basis, we should be looking at putting in bridges. Water quality is something that we're going to be judged on very strongly over the next number of years, obviously, and we need to have quick wins as quick as possible. These don't have to be massively expensive. I think the other thing is if there are options to move machinery around by roadways rather than across these bridges don't have to be super structures like anything that you'd need to carry heavy weight. Maybe no harm just to have them capable of carrying a tractor and fertilizer spreader possibly. But in terms of silage equipment, if you have road access to fields or slurry equipment, you could send them around the road rather than having to put them across the bridge, and that will obviously reduce the kind of the loading capacity or the capacity of that bridge to carry weight apart from cows crossing it. So that can help to reduce the cost associated with something like that. Finally then, I suppose farm roadways. Some farms in the country don't have to worry about this at all because they don't have dikes and drains running along by roadways, but then there's a lot of farms obviously that are on more difficult soils that are depending on drains and dikes to improve soil quality, etc. So you can see here in this scenario, we've no fence along by the river here. The track is here obviously, and we need to fence that in order to make sure that no stock get into it. It is fenced along at this side, whereas in this scenario we can see that the fence line is in place along by the dike here, and the road is falling actually across this way as well, back into the paddock as well. So that's the other thing, I suppose, in relation to what people have to do at the moment, is that where roadways are falling in towards dikes, they're going to have to be recambered to move the potential flow, which can be anything from 8 litres up to anything around the 8 litre mark of dung and urine coming from cows on a daily basis on roadways. And obviously the fact that they're hard surfaces, when rain falls on them, if the fall is into the dike, then it's going to convey the nutrient associated with that dung and urine directly to the dike. So we need to fall those away into the field here, and the field will actually act as a kind of a nutrient trap then. So we maybe need to be a bit more organised around what we need to do in these, because most people will probably have to do some sort of recambering or correction of the direction of flow, whereas maybe not all people will have to do fencing. So finally, I suppose the last piece then is just to assess the situation around soil water and the creation of soil water. So what you're talking about when you come to soil water is pretty much collecting yards, feeding yards where stock are out in the open and they're being fed. That water obviously has to be collected, and that's a significant volume. I mean, we talk about slurry storage in a lot of cases. Slurry storage probably on a lot of farms can be adequate until we add the soil water fraction into it, and then we have vast quantities of water being collected that are contributing to very high levels of slurry/soil water, which is now defined as slurry, in slurry tanks, and putting pressure on the storage capacity on the farm and forcing people to try and drop levels of tanks in inappropriate weather. So I suppose I think a lot of people maybe focus on storage capacity. I think it's no harm to actually focus on, can we minimize the volumes that are being pushed into these tanks or being collected by these tanks, and that can in itself can create extra capacity, I suppose, within farms. So I think it's no harm to look at these options around soil yards. Would obviously be to cover them. The other options that are there is to make sure that during the winter period that we're not forced to collect them if they're not in use. So a collecting yard that is not in use once the cows are dried off, that it can be cleaned down, washed down properly, collected into the slurry tank, and then diverted. Any washing water coming off that can then be diverted to a clean water outfall. The other thing that we would generally find, and again it's a complacency issue on farms because you just get used to things, is that downpipes along the likes of these sheds and yards tend to, if they get broken, don't tend to get fixed in a timely fashion. So I think, look, this is a good time of year to be looking at those situations. A tractor turns around dropping a bale of silage or something, clips a chute, next thing that chute is running down into the yard. And as you know, with some of the heavy outbursts of rain that we get from time to time, it could be a very short space of time to filling a tank, and then people come under pressure. They have to relieve the pressure, obviously, by putting out slurry, and we need to try to move away from that. So there's a two-pronged approach to this. There's the management of the soil water areas. Dairy washings, can we reduce them in some way? Can they be reused maybe to wash down yards and stuff to minimize what has to be collected? Can we just minimize what washing needs to be done in any kind of a way at all to reduce soil water storage requirements? And then also just making sure that we're not collecting clean water that we don't need to be cleaning. So now is a good time to examine the yard in that sense and see, can we put some corrective measures in place, I suppose, in between. And as I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to build. In some cases, it can, like, there's significant soil water collection in some cases, and maybe we can manage that better to minimize the requirement to actually collect that during the close period. But there's no doubt about it, there are people that are going to have to look at installing storage facilities as well. And if anything, look, I'm only speculating when I say this, but if anything, storage requirement periods are probably likely to increase, if anything. So any kind of additional storage facilities that you're putting in place now are going to be actually an advantage to you into the future, as well as just being a real source of stress relief, I suppose, if on the occasion that we have bad weather when we come into that January period when slurry can be spread, that we're not forced to spread slurry, that we're more comfortable. That works for everybody, works for you as a farmer, would work for a contractor not being under savage pressure to be expected to push out slurry out of every farm in the country in the one day, basically. And then just purely obviously from the big win is from the environment's point of view. If we can hold our slurry until such time as we can make best use of it, the risk of overland flow, etc., is reduced quite significantly. So we're spreading in appropriate conditions, I suppose. Time of the year there now is going to vary from county to county, from parish to parish even. So like some people will be quite safe spreading slurry immediately after the close period in the right conditions. Other people are obviously going to have to carry it for longer, even though you might be in a zone that's only 16 weeks, your land type may not be suitable to it. So we need to be looking now at this stage of the year to see what can we do to eliminate these areas from soil water. Obviously, the simple things would be to fix the likes of the downpipes, as I said, that are broken, that are running onto these. And as I said, it's complacency, and that's not a negative when I say that. It's just we get used to seeing something wrong. It's maybe not a big problem at the moment. We forget about it very quickly. It's just a habituation, I suppose. I think they describe it as that we get used to seeing that scenario and we don't fix it. So maybe go around the yard in the next couple of weeks, assess the situation in terms of downpipes and where is their soil water being generated from. Can you do something about it? Write it up somewhere so that you have a list that you can refer back to, so that you don't have to go around doing the assessment again. And then put a plan in place to try and, as I said, reduce the soil water generation if you can, or if you can't, maybe start thinking along the lines of increasing the storage capacity. Now, I suppose there is some talk of increased soil water storage capacity requirements coming on stream as well. So it may be no harm to do this anyway, to be reducing your soil water requirements, which may also be looking at having to increase soil water capacity as well. And that could be as simple as a large storage tank that you're maybe filling with a submersible pump. It won't necessarily cost the earth. It doesn't have to be a big concrete store or anything. But look, so slurry capacity in general, I suppose, is something that we need to be looking at and assessing. And now is a good time of the year to be doing that. As I said, the pressure is beginning to come off. So I suppose that's pretty much it for today. As I said, I just wanted to say a few timely reminders, I suppose, that people are beginning to get a little bit more relaxed at this stage. With silage first cut done, generally things begin to start to calm down a small bit on farm. So the opportunity is there now to maybe look into these aspects of the farm. So I suppose the two things that we need to focus on, I suppose, is making sure that we get cows bred that haven't been bred so far. Look at your finish of your breeding season. Can you shorten it up? And what you need to do, obviously, as I said, is to make sure that you've all the cows bred before you make that decision, I suppose. So you need to make sure that every cow is bred before you go pulling your bull or whatever from, or stop your AI season. If you're cutting back, to make sure that you're not going to have significant empty cow losses as a result of a significant change in your breeding season, or else you just start to work back gradually. And then on this aspect of it here, in terms of the silage effluent and the silage yards and soil water collection and so forth from dirty yards, can you consult with your advisor, look at the farmyard, can you do something to reduce it? Do you need to increase silage storage capacity, as I said, effluent storage capacity, etc., and just put a plan in place then to deal with that, so that you're obviously avoiding creating any pollution issues. The other aspect of it is, I suppose, maybe reducing stock numbers coming into the winter is something that people could use to reduce capacity requirements as well. So everything should be on the table. I'm not saying that anyone has to reduce their herd size in order to keep in line with their slurry storage. If you want to add the slurry storage, that's fine. In some cases, people have decided to cut back because maybe they don't have a successor and they don't see the justification for building extra capacity for when there's no one coming through to follow on from them. But slurry storage capacity is something that's going to become more and more in the limelight than ever before, I suppose. So it's worthwhile having a look at that. So look, I suppose just some topics that we're going to cover in the next couple of weeks, I suppose, is actually around that pulling the bull. Again, we'll have a refresher on that, just the advantages of doing it, I suppose. I'm going to look at some protected urea issues around the spreader with Francis Quigley there in the next couple of weeks as well. And there's other issues as well with ICBF that Dan Reardon is looking to talk to you about, to just make you aware of as well. So there are some of the topics that are coming up. We'll wrap it up with that for today anyway, and sure, we'll talk to you again next week. Enjoy the fine weather while we have it, and everybody stay safe and take care, both from a health and safety point of view of farming and from a COVID point of view. And we'll talk to you next week. Thanks very much.